McInerney from Croakey, and I'm here with Suneel Jethani from the University of Melbourne. You're a researcher, and you've been one of the keynote speakers at the symposium we've been at here at the Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Health, talking about wearable technologies. Now, yours was... the title of yours was Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Why should we?
I think one of the really interesting things about being someone who deals with this type of technology every day is the kind of blind enthusiasm or buy-in that we see. You put a new technology out into the market, and what we see is just very celebratory commentaries about the technology, and the technology is something that we should be optimistic about by all means, but there's always an underside. There's always something that we need to be considering, or something that's being just bracketed away, and something that maybe the marketers of those technologies, or the people that benefit from the data that those technologies produce, might not want us to really be thinking about. And that's why I always open my talks at these things with a provocation to consider the underexplored areas of the technology itself.
Now, we probably should say first, and you've done your PhD, but we're talking particularly about health wearables. What sort of things are we talking about particularly, and what do you focus on?
I look at health and wearable technology from the perspective of, say, a Fitbit or a Garmin or an Apple Watch, but I also try to look at those technologies as being part of a much bigger continuum of technologies that have been with us for decades and decades and decades. So I like to make the analogy that using Fitbit data with your GP is kind of the equivalent of turning up to your analyst and them asking you about your mood ring, the old thermochromic mood rings. So I like to sort of think of these technologies as part of a much bigger kind of continuum, which also includes technologies that have a novelty factor. And a lot of these data garnering devices are lifestyle technologies that have a novelty factor, and they sort of produce seemingly thought-provoking information, which are sort of being moved into a kind of clinical space. And one of the issues I look at is that's a good thing that we're seeing the technologisation of the doctor-patient relationship in productive ways, but we're also seeing a relatively kind of uncritical transfer of those technologies.
You applied the pharmacon theory to that. Can you run me through that? It's I think remedy, poison, scapegoat. What is that?
Yeah, I sort of look at that as a way of thinking through some of the issues around the technology, and to me it's an object that has the capacity to be beneficial and detrimental in the same person at the same time. And to me that's a good way of capturing what a wearable technology does. And while it gives us insightful data, it also produces certain effects, certain ways of thinking about the body and thinking about health that might not necessarily be entirely productive to one's well-being.
Expand on that? What are things, because you talked about body image issues?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in how a technology that helps you track your health and helps you keep track of, say, what you're consuming on a daily basis, or how many steps you're taking, how these technologies might either repathologize or inadvertently pathologize people with a tendency towards, say, body dysmorphic conditions. How can the technologies become used compulsively? How can one be too dedicated to their data set? And then also, what does an emphasis on data do in terms of producing blind spots? So we might have conditions where the numbers look great and there's a whole bunch of statistical probabilities sort of scripted into that might indicate good health, but there might be certain blind spots because the technology itself isn't always looking as holistically as a non-technologized form of taking someone's medical history.
What's an example of that? Where do you see the problem?
I guess the technology itself is designed with a predetermined set of indicators, and when you become a little bit reliant on certain factors around health, we might see certain oversights or certain blind spots. So you can, for example, be looking at your blood sugar, your blood pressure, your daily activity, and maybe tracking your cholesterol, but not looking at other lifestyle factors that you could be tracking. You might be looking at sleep and mood, but not looking at certain other factors like the amount of hours you're spending at a keyboard at work, for instance. So the picture of health, the picture of health is always going to be determined by qualitative factors which are individual, and the technologies themselves aren't very good at building in that individual nuance. They sort of paint a kind of best picture, and with cold communities in particular, those are the groups that tend to get marginalised, because cold communities have very different determinants of health and social cohesion as the sort of primary market would for a wearable technology that's priced at about $100 to $150 to $200 to $300.
And that, of course, was the big focus here of what these technologies might mean in terms of opportunity and risk for cold communities. What's your takeaway from the discussions that you led, but also that you overheard and the questions?
I think there was probably 2 or 3 really interesting points, which I guess to me demonstrate why we need to have discussions like this one at CEH. And the first of those was around the idea of the relationship between the individual and population, and how determinants of health framed at the level of individuals are going to scale up differently to the level of populations or level of communities, depending on people's cultural perceptions of the body or cultural conceptions of health and responsibility and those sorts of things. And that's always going to be different between Eastern and Western philosophies on health and the body, but also other cultural determinants and socioeconomic determinants which flow through the so-called category of cold communities. The other one was around designing for cold communities, or designing apps and services for cold communities. And I think that one of the interesting ideas that came through the talks were, when we design for cold communities, what are the trade-offs being made? So how is catering to a market that might not be entirely lucrative, how is that being offset or subsidised in some other way? So what are the trade-offs?
And what's your worry about that? What kind of trade-offs could that be?
I think what happens then is we get a sort of double effect of the marginalisation of certain communities with the technology itself, in that maybe we see more risks for the people who use technologies that are sort of designed in that way when they're designed as an afterthought. So maybe we see new and interesting sort of license taken with privacy, for instance. What are those trade-offs? So if we're subsidising the technology in one way, how is that being offset in other ways? And maybe some of those concessions are going to turn up in policy around privacy or ownership, or even in functionality, and in the accuracy of the sensors or the devices themselves. And are we sort of creating a stratification of technology by catering to larger groups outside the dominant sort of consumer frame?
Thank you very much, Suneel. I know you have to go off and give a lecture now.
I do.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Cheers.